think that our life could come down to just a roll of a dice, a flip of the cards.
It's precious. Freedom is precious, you know.
I was on death row for 22 years. I was locked up for 24 years. The Berlin Wall came down. The World Trade Center happened.
You know, I did 41 years of my life, you know, for something I didn't do.
He's free, he says, because the Arizona Justice Project uncovered evidence of a shoddy investigation, suppression of evidence.
It was shameful. It was shameful what they did to me.
I was locked up almost 30 years for something I didn't do.
I was one of those portrayed as a monster. I was the one that they read about in the paper or seen on television. That's the person sentenced to death. He's a monster, kill him.
It feels like I'm on the front of a rocket ship going through, you know.
Going through space?
Yeah, just...
And finally in 2002, we had DNA evidence that matched another man, and I was subsequently released, and he was arrested for the murder. I spent 10 years, 3 months, and 8 days in prison for it.
80% of the stuff that freed me was in 3 files: the prosecutor's files, the coroner's file, and the police file. Was there all along. Was there all along.
For 15 years, I was convinced that Martin Bryant was guilty. That's what I'd been told by the media, that he was revengeful and crazed.
There's somebody going crazy shooting people here.
He did not say one word. He never ran. He walked everywhere, just shooting people.
On the 28th of April 1996, 35 people were murdered at Port Arthur in Tasmania. 20 of those were shot in the Broad Arrow Cafe. It was the worst massacre in Australia's history, and the shooter was quickly singled out.
When Martin Bryant first appeared here in the Supreme Court of Tasmania, bizarrely, he pleaded not guilty.
You know what's happened on that day? 28th of April. No. I'm sure about that.
Could Bryant have been this brutal mass murderer? In one interview, he showed a compassion towards animals, saying that he'd never shoot bottles, as the broken glass might injure them. And for 6 months, while in isolation, he insisted he was innocent of the killings.
What would you think about a person who has killed 35 people? What would be your opinion of that person?
It's a wicked, awful, horrendous thing.
And no amount of persuasion would make him change his plea, so a new defence lawyer was arranged.
Representing Martin Bryant, his new lawyer, John Avery, appointed after Bryant had pleaded not guilty 6 weeks ago.
I was trying to avoid a show trial, a circus, a pantomime, call it what you like, but it also involved having all these witnesses, damaged people, come to court and have to give evidence where the outcome was always inevitable.
Why told you what you've done? What have I? You've killed 35 people.
It appears both the state and defence tried to coerce Bryant to admit guilt, but he insisted that he had not visited the historic site for 6 years. Was he capable of shooting so many people so quickly with such efficiency, emulating the skills of a trained marksman?
He took 15 seconds to kill 12 people and wound 10. 15 seconds.
When you practiced shooting, where did you hold the gun? On the left. So you're left-handed. And did you ever practice shooting from the hip? No, never. Never.
But witnesses said the shooter was right-handed and shot with extreme accuracy from his right hip. And there was a problem with Bryant's weapons too.
This weapon's a 223 caliber Colt self-loading rifle, model AR-15. This was the weapon that was used in the cafe.
An AR-15 was used in the cafe, and a very rare SLR-308 was used to shoot people in the car park. The SLR was later found at the seascape after the fire, damaged with parts missing. This looked almost identical to Bryant's AR-10, but that gun was taken from him 34 days earlier, when he had walked into Terry Hills's gun shop with it loaded.
Is it loaded? No, it's not loaded.
both the firearms used in the massacre were never owned or used by Bryant.
There's somebody going crazy shooting people here.
Oh.
There he is, he's over there. I can't believe it.
Without the weapon, he was nothing. He was a nobody. He was a sad, dim, irritable, insipid boy, little boy.
How come you never got around to getting a driver's license?
I didn't think I'd ever pass. In the first. Because I'm not that bright.
But no, he did not have a serious mental illness. He did not have schizophrenia. He was of very low IQ. He was borderline to subnormal. His IQ was lower than over 98% of the general population, so he's a very dim man. All that was required to get him talking and keep him talking was to show an interest.
They did everything to manipulate and coax a confession, but in their initial interviews, Brian seems blissfully unaware of what had happened at Port Arthur. Later that day, he was at the Seascape cottage, allegedly holding owners David and Sally Martin hostage.
Oh, hello. It's Terry again. How are you? I'm fine. How's things going in there, mate? Fine, couldn't be better. Just like on a Hawaiian holiday. Hawaiian holiday? Yes, that's correct.
It is while he is on the phone to negotiate a Terry that gunshots from a second shooter in the cottage can be clearly heard.
I'm making up some sandwiches. These people have got I'm making up some sandwiches. These people have got salad and some bacon and eggs. I'm going to fry up some bacon and eggs for them. Mm-hmm. Hey, I've got to go because this kettle's squealing downstairs.
There's a siege in progress, and Bryant is single-handedly keeping the police under fire whilst making up sandwiches and tea. It defies logic.
All I can say is that the person that we believed was involved in this matter is in a house down in the Port Arthur area.
The following morning, the cottage burnt down, and Bryant survived, and for months they kept on trying to convince him that he was the shooter and that witnesses had seen him.
There have been many witnesses who have given very graphic descriptions of you being responsible for killing those people.
It's horrendous.
Any idea who he was?
No idea. Not a local, I don't think.
The media tainted the case by printing pictures of him, but several witness accounts refer to a man much younger. One witness had known Bryant from the age of 10. This was Jim Laycock. He was at the general store and had seen the shooter. In his statement, he said it was not Martin.
After he gave me this cock and bull story about going surfing, and I poo-pooed that, he readily then went through the events that...
It is alleged that Avery finally persuaded this vulnerable and mentally challenged man to plead guilty, suggesting that if he did not, he would never see his mother again. But why did they need a guilty plea when they should have had all the DNA evidence in the cafe to convict him, as Rebecca McKenna had spoken with the gunman? The shooter wore no gloves, and the police had identified his tray, but they never found Brian's fingerprints and DNA at the historic site. The killer could have easily been confirmed. His sweat, skin, saliva and fingerprints were all on that tray and on the solo can. But the problem was that the fingerprint evidence would have exonerated Martin Bryant and exposed him as the patsy.
%80 of the stuff that freed me was in 3 files: the prosecutor's files, the coroner's files, and the police file. Was there all along.
It's precious. Freedom is precious, you know. It was shameful. It was shameful what they did.